Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the first video of Dicing with Dragons post Dragonlance. So, tonight, if you didn't watch the first video, don't worry about it. Long story short, I am moving away from Dragonlance and Dungeons and Dragons content due to ethical reasons and the fact that I don't agree with the Open Gaming License 1.1. Instead, I'm going to run another RPG, which we'll be talking about in a minute, called Blades in the Dark. This video, on the other hand, is about you're fed up with Wizards of the Coast's nonsense, like I am, and many other people are. What other RPGs are out there? And the good news is there's lots of them, more than I can possibly cover in a whole series of videos these days, because we are in an independent game explosion. But I'm going to talk about a few of my favorites, the things you might want to check out. You'll notice a lot of the games, pretty much most of the games I'm going to talk about, are horror, dark fantasy, kind of dreary settings, because that's what I like best. There are other games out there for people who like fantasy, and some of the ones I'm going to talk about have fantasy supplements and things like that. But I'm going to focus on horror because I like horror. Now, it's absolutely fair to say, just because I don't mention an RPG doesn't mean I don't like it. There are tons of wonderful RPGs out there. This is just a list of my favorite. If I don't mention it, it may be that it's not one I like it, but it's not one of my favorites. It might be that I don't like it, although there aren't many that's true of. Or it may be that I don't know anything about it, or at least haven't either played or run it. I'm going to stick to games I've either played or run at some point in my life. I'm 46 and I've been gaming since I was 13, so that's a lot of games. But all the games on this list, I've either run it or played it at least once, and are, to the best of my knowledge, in print, meaning you can go on Amazon right now and buy them. Um, there are lots of wonderful games I could talk about that are no longer being published, and I'll probably do a video about classic RPGs that are no longer in print at some point in the future. But I'm going to talk about things. Okay, you want something other than D&D? Here's some choices. Coming weeks, I'm going to pick some of the ones I'm going to talk about, and I'm going to dive into their lore. Because there are some crazy RPGs out there with some really cool lore that could keep me busy for years. So let's start with the system that we are moving the live plays to, which is Blades in the Dark. Like I said, so Blades in the Dark is a rogues game. You are the group is creating and running its own criminal empire in a post-apocalyptic world. A post-apocalyptic magical world, I should say. 850 years before the setting of the game, something happened. Nobody's really sure what. Common legend is an evil sorcerer did some terrible ritual that seemed to have gone sideways and destroyed the world. A couple of things happened. One, the sun went out. For 850 years, nobody has seen the sun in this world. There's just a bare ember of it. It can be seen at dawn and again at dusk. The other thing, the three things the disaster did. The second thing the disaster did was it slammed shut the doors of death. That's flowery language, but what does it mean? Everyone who dies comes back as a ghost. So the world is crowded with ghosts. There are more dead people than living people. And the ghosts are angry. And as time goes on, they go mad. Because they're ghosts. They're stuck in the world, but not of the world. The Emperor, who is immortal, who has lived since before the Cataclysm, used great spells to keep the ghosts out of the few remaining cities. Because the third thing that happened, which was a gigantic physical apocalypse. Earthquakes, volcanoes, entire continents shattered, to the point that there are just a few islands left floating in an inky black sea. The city of Duskwall, or Duskvol, or the Dusk, as some of the criminal element calls them, sits on one of the larger islands. It's not the capital of the empire, but it's close. It and the other cities of the empire are surrounded by a wall of lightning. It keeps most of the ghosts out and the demons out. Because yeah, aside from the fact that ghosts are now let loose and no one who dies can go to the underworld, demons have stepped fully into the physical world. They are no longer, if they ever were in this setting, spirits. They are physical, corporeal beings. Very powerful, very dangerous. In that power, though, is opportunity. The biggest of these demons are known as the Leviathan. They are gigantic sea serpents with a substance known as electroplasm coursing through their veins instead of blood. Ghosts are made out of electroplasm as well, but Leviathans are the easiest way to collect it. So they send giant ships out beyond the lightning barriers to harvest the blood, which powers the lightning walls and the lights and the steampunk type technology they have. Um, most of it isn't steampunk. There is a bit of steampunk involved. There's really a steampunk kind of setting where it's very similar to a cross between London and Prague and Vienna because the city's all built on canals. And in this setting, our protagonists, because I don't want to call them heroes, they're not heroes. The protagonists of this setting are criminals. There's kind of this idea that the age of heroes is past. When whatever happened broke the world, there are no heroes anymore. Or at least there aren't many. Instead, our intrepid group will create some manner of never do well, which will take a type of never do well. They might be a cutter, which are warriors. You solve solutions with violence, very prone to combat's the first solution, intimidation, extortion. They might be a spider sitting in the middle of the web, managing contacts, managing other people, all about control. They might be a whisper, a magician that deals with the weird spiritual energies of the world. They might be a leech, which is an alchemist. All these different options, and these are not classes. It's worth saying. Um, there's very much a concept in Blades that your characters are competent in general. It's just they focus on something in particular. But after each person chooses how they approach crime, they will, as a group, decide what type of crime they prefer. Are they smugglers? Are they hawkers, which are drug dealers? Are they assassins, which I don't think I need to explain? Are they a gang of bravos working as a mercenary contract, perhaps doing a bit of extortion work? Hmm. No, it isn't to say that if the group decides they want to be assassins, they can't do a little bit of thievery. They absolutely can. They just specialize in assassination and kidnapping. That's the game we're headed to. You'll see character creation tomorrow, and then we will be playing it out from there. So let's talk about some of the other games out there. I want to talk in particular about a very interesting concept that I don't think it's executed well often, but I'm going to talk about two examples of the times I think it was done well that are available now. One, this is what we call generic role playing games. The idea of a generic role playing game is it's a system of rules, but it's setting neutral. The granddaddy of this is the generic universal role playing game system known as GURPS. It was a set of rules. It still is a set of rules. You can go get it. Um, and then you could apply those rules to horror or fantasy or superheroes or anything else you wanted. GURPS is not a great system, in my opinion. It's not terrible. I'm not disrespecting it for those of you who like it. But for one thing, there's a whole bunch of drama we could get into Steve Jackson, which I'm not going to get into. But the system is also kind of clunky, and it's been done better, in my opinion. Another a much better example is Savage Worlds. Savage Worlds is a pretty straightforward system. For any given situation, you're rolling at least 2 dice. One die is based on the skill or attribute you're using, and then the other is d6. And when I say it's based on the skill or attribute you're using, your skill rating is a die type 4, 6, 8, 10, 12. You roll that, and you roll d6, and you use the better of the two results. The other nice thing, because you might be thinking if it's d12, statistically the d6 is almost useless. It's not for two reasons. First, you can roll a 1 on a d12 and still roll a 6 on a d6. Two is dice in Savage Worlds do what old school gamers like myself call explode. Means if you're rolling a d12 in Savage Worlds and you roll a 12, you have a total of 12, but you're not done yet. You roll the die again. If you roll another 12, now you have a total of 24, and you roll the die again. You guessed it, if you roll another 12, it's now 36. And again, and you keep, as long as you roll the highest number on that die, be it a 12, a 6, a 4, an 8, a 10, you take that total, you roll again, and you add to it. And you keep rolling as long as you roll the max number. This tends to be a lot of fun because you get absolutely ridiculous numbers if somebody gets lucky. The other mechanic, which is rather interesting, is how they handle initiative. They don't handle initiative with the die roll. You handle it with a standard deck of 54 playing cards. 54, not 52, because you include 2 jokers. Initiative starts at ace, king, queen, jack, all the way down to 2. You go on your card. There are powers and various things that let you draw additional cards. Now, aside from being a generic... the other thing I should say about it as a generic system before I get into its specifics is how it handles magic or superpowers. There's kind of this concept in Savage Worlds that you don't need a million different names for essentially the same effect. You know, a wizard pointing a wand at somebody and firing a lightning bolt, mechanically, isn't that different from a spaceman pointing a laser pistol at you and pulling the trigger. Or, a Zen master firing chi energy at you, beams of chi energy at you. Or a card shark throwing cards at lightning speed. Or, Scott Summers' Cyclops' eye beams. So you have generic powers. Bolt, which would be all the things I just mentioned. Blast, which are like your fireballs. And then you modify those with the trappings. Well, I don't want to fire just a laser beam. I want to fire a freeze like Mr. Freeze. So you get a freeze trapping. So now it does cold damage, it slows or even paralyzes the person and things like that. But still, it's fundamentally the same power. It could be heat ray, and then you have heat that you add on to it. That's kind of the idea. And how you approach magic depends on the type, or how you approach the powers depends on the type of character you are. Maybe you're a wizard, a magician. Maybe you're a mad scientist. Maybe you're a superhero. And they have books and things like that expanding it all out. There's also a couple of really cool worlds for Savage Worlds, including the daddy of them all, which I'm going to wind up doing some more videos about because it's one of my favorite RPGs in the world, which is Deadlands. Deadlands was originally an RPG in its own right. Then they streamlined it and turned it into Savage Worlds. Real briefly, Deadlands is what's called Weird West. In the Deadlands universe, during the Battle of Gettysburg, the Battle of Gettysburg ends. All of a sudden, dead bodies, both from the north and the south, rise up and attack Union forces so they can't pursue the Confederates. On the southern side, in case you think this was some southern necromancy, they have some problems with the undead as well. But a bigger problem is some unstoppable killing machine starts going through the wounded camps and surgically removing eyes and hands and legs and things of that nature. They reveal much later that it was someone possessed by a cursed surgeon's scalpel. A surgeon's scalpel that some years later would wind up in England in the hands of a certain Jack. The South and the North eventually realize somehow, some way, magic came back, and most of it isn't terribly friendly. And they eventually fall into kind of a stalemate. And then the war eventually ends, and the South, for all intents and purposes, wins because the South didn't want to defeat the North; it wanted to be a separate country. It becomes a Confederate States of America, a second country formally recognized by the U.S. government. Um, it should be noted that by the point that the game starts, slavery has long since been abolished because weird science has been developed, which makes slavery pretty much unnecessary. Um, but the neat thing about Deadlands, aside from the setting, which I think is pretty cool in and of itself, is there are multiple magics in the system, each with its own distinct flavor. You could be a shaman, one of the Native American tribes, who honors the spirits to get their power. You could be blessed, which are devotees of God. Usually, they very stereotypical or Catholic or otherwise Christian blessed. But you could be an imam, a Muslim imam. You could be a Jewish rabbi. You don't even have to be clergy. You could just be a person of devout faith who gets power from God to smite the unholy. There are chi masters who are martial arts movie guys. Um, there are mad scientists because you see, California had a giant earthquake. Part of it fell in the ocean, and in the aftermath of the earthquake, they found ghost rock. Ghost rock looks like coal with weird veins of white coursing through it, but it burns hotter than coal. It burns longer than coal, and the other thing where it gets the same is when it's burned, white smoke comes out of it, and in the smoke you can see faces of screaming in pain, and it makes a sound very much like someone's screaming in pain. A whole new science called new science, although most people call it mad science, develops out of ghost rock, which makes Deadlands a steampunk world. But the working with ghost rock drives you crazy, which is why they're known as mad scientists. That's also why slavery has largely become unnecessary. They have such advanced steampunk technology. Just get automations to do the work. It's cheaper, and you don't have to feed them. Another that well, I'll be doing a bunch of videos about that, so don't worry about it right now. Another neat setting, and there's dozens, so I'm not going to mention them all. But another one of my favorites is Rippers, which is a similar enough idea. You are a member of a secret society in England, started by both Dr. Abraham von Helsing and Dr. Jack. Jack went a little mad and became Jack the Ripper. They are dedicated to hunting monsters. Where they get the name Rippers is they harvest organs out of monsters, a vampire's fangs, a werewolf's claws, and implant them into themselves to give themselves the power of monsters to fight other monsters. It is a really cool concept. it just got relatively a few years ago re-released as Ripper's Resurrected. In the original campaign, I know that you actually wound up personally getting to fight Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, the mum, pretty much every iconic monster. Great fun, cool system. So I don't want to go too much longer, but let me mention a couple of other systems very briefly. Rifts is also a really neat system. Um, and I'm going to mention Rifts both as its own system, which I don't entirely recommend. But there's also a Rift Savage Worlds supplement, which is the first time in history, and the game's been around pretty much since TSR, that the creator has allowed somebody else to adapt his rules. Because the rules of Rifts the problem with Rifts is it's a really awesome concept with really clunky rules. What's the concept? Sometime in Earth's future, there's a nuclear war. Whenever everyone has a little bit of psychic energy, but when you die is very briefly tripled. There's a nuclear war, a whole bunch of people die, a whole bunch of this energy is released. It floods into the ley lines that crisscross the planet. The ley lines surge with power. Them surging with power causes natural disasters, which kills more people, which sends more energy to the lines. And whole rifts, there go the name, start ripping into the fabric of reality, connecting it to other worlds. Children start getting born with the power of magic. Children start getting born with psychic powers. And then the dimensional beings, or DBs, start coming in. Some of them are relatively mundane. Cat people, bug people, there's also a whole nasty bug people. Some of them are demons. Some of them are vampires. Vampires are a big part of the setting. Particularly funny enough, basically, vampires have taken over Mexico. Why did they take over northern Mexico, particularly? Oh, vampires, of course, in folklore, or at least in Dracula, are vulnerable to running water. Rain is water in motion, therefore, rain is running water. Rain kills vampires. Large parts of northern Mexico are desert. They settled in the deserts to avoid the rain. Atlantis has reappeared above the surface. It is now an interdimensional market where you can buy literally everything, run by creatures right out of Lovecraft called the Splugorth. Um, 4 demons showed up on various parts of Africa, were all traveling to meet and turn into an uber demon. You may have heard of these demons. They're a little well known: death, war, famine, pestilence. In England, Camelot has been reborn. Um, North America isn't doing so hot, unfortunately. Most of the nation's kind of gone sideways. Um, the East Coast cities were mostly destroyed in the nuclear war, and a whole lot of rifts opened up. West Coast didn't do so well either. So most human life is in the center of the country, particularly around a new empire called. Okay, I can't think of the name. A new empire, the coalition under Joseph Karl Prozek II, or Karl Prozek II. The coalition despises magic, despises non-humans, discourages literacy and education. They do allow psychics, although mostly as second-class citizens used to hunt everything else. Um, they're deliberately quite fascist. And most of the other major human civilizations in the world aren't much better. But it's neat. If you ever have players at your table, and I've had them before, that want to play crazy things, like I want to play a dragon, I want to play a cyborg. Rifts is the answer. This dragon, in the main books, you have cyborgs, you have vanilla humans, you have bursters, which are essentially the Human Torch, juicers, which are essentially Bane, um, crazies, which are Deadpool, cyber knights, which are basically bloody Jedi, except instead of having to pull out their lightsabers; they just focus in their weapon. A sword of energy appears in their hands. Dragons are all, walking tank mecha called Glitter Boys are all viable playable characters. It's a gonzo setting and it's a lot of fun. Check it out sometime. Even if you agree with me, the setting is too clunky to run. The books are full of a wealth of really cool concepts and ideas that you can use for your own game. Um, one other system I think I want to mention, and again, real quick with Rifts, if you don't like the main setting, there is a Rift Savage Worlds, which is much simpler. Two more things I want to mention. One is the other generic system I was going to mention, which is powered by the Apocalypse, which isn't a generic system in of itself, but there's a million iterations of. One of my personal favorites, though I have not gotten to play it yet, is called Monster Hearts, which is kind of Buffy the Vampire Slayer with a little bit of Twilight thrown in. You're in high school. It's teenage monster angst, the role playing game. You're a vampire, you're a ghost, you're a werewolf, you're a demon, you made a deal with the devil, something, and you're trying to survive the greatest hell of all, high school. It's also one of the few systems where I've ever seen where there's actually explicit rules for what happens after your character has sex. There's a bunch of other Powered by the Apocalypse games that are really cool. I'm not going to get into them because there's too many versions of them. But it's a very straightforward system. Monster of the Week's also a lot of fun, which is another Powered by the Apocalypse, where it's a horror game where you can essentially play any character from any piece of fiction you want. It is not unreasonable using the rules in what's in the book to have Harry Dresden, Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Sam and Dean Winchester, and the Ghostbusters even all in the same group. The other RPG I want to mention, which is not a generic but a lot of fun, is called Shadowrun. For those of you not familiar with Shadowrun, you're probably familiar with its sister system. They were created by two different companies at about the same time with a similar source material. So many of you have probably heard of at least the video game Cyberpunk, or the Netflix series, or the genre in general, which is cyberpunk. I like to think of cyberpunk as high technology, low society. It's a near future where cybernetic implants have been created, you know, robot arms and things like that to attach to your body. But society, it is capitalism gone wild. Big corporations run the world. Um, that is cyberpunk. Um, you can find influences in it from um, pretty much everything ever written or based on the stories of Philip K. Dick, like the Blade Runner movie, or Total Recall. RoboCop also is a very cyberpunk type of series of movies. Um, there's another movie, it's a very well known set of movies that have a very cyberpunk feel that in some ways almost are more reminiscent of Shadowrun, which is The Matrix. Because what is cyberpunk? So what is Shadowrun? If cyberpunk is high technology, low society, because society is going down the toilet, Shadowrun is high technology, low society, high magic. Because in 2012, the Mayan apocalypse, in the Shadowrun universe, it wasn't the apocalypse. The world didn't end. Magic came back. So you have the first thing that happens is Native American magic in particular starts working again. The U.S. government finds new resources on Native American land, tries to push it off of them. Native Americans go, "No, you didn't." And all of a sudden, their spells start working, and there's an actual rebellion going on. And a fair chunk of what is now the United States actually gets ceded back to the Native Americans, particularly Washington, with the exception of the city of Seattle, which is a popular place to set Shadowrun games. Um, Children start being born. Tall, thin, with pointed ears. Elves. With memories of a language that isn't like anything spoken. Elven. Um, Short, stocky children are born. The first dwarves. There's another surge in magic in a few years, and extremely tall, brutish humans with horns. Trolls. And big, burly humans with tusks. Orcs are born. So you can be a human, an elf, a dwarf, a troll, an orc in a modern society. For those of you who are wondering, yes, a lot of people have said that that Bright is Shadowrun the television show. But orcs, trolls, elves, humans, vampires, of course, exist. Vampirism is a disease, HNHVV. No, HMHVV, human metahuman vampire virus. Affects different people different ways. Humans and some other species tend to turn into vampires. Elves turn into banshees. Sasquatch, because yes, Sasquatch are a thing, turn into Grendels and so forth. So you have this society where the corporations literally rule the world. 10 corporations form a corporate council that exists on a satellite in orbit around the Earth, running everything. Everyone is required to have a system identification number, a SIN. If you want to work, if you want to pay taxes, if you want to own a home, you have to have a SIN. If you're born in a legitimate hospital, you have a SIN. Problem is, some people are born on the streets, back alley, hospital type places. A whole bunch of these SINs were lost when the entire internet crashed. People fall through the cracks. And these people that fall through the cracks present an opportunity for the corporations. Deniable assets. They don't work for me. They're not on my payroll. How could they be? They're sinless. But sinless agents can do work. So your characters are shadow runners. You run between the shadows of the megacorps. You are mercenaries. It's a pretty straightforward system. Roll a whole bunch of buckets of d6s, highest looking for the highest number. And I thought of at least two more systems I probably want to mention. At least that one more system. The other ones, I'll get into the other one another time, but it's too complicated. I don't really want to go through it all right now. So the last system I'm going to mention is the one we almost ran instead of Blades in the Dark. Because I said, okay, I have these two games I'm willing to run. What is everybody more interested in? And the group decided they wanted to play Blades in the Dark. I said, okay, cool. I love Blades in the Dark. The other one is called Knights Black Agents. It is based on a somewhat generic system called Gumshoe. Gumshoe is designed for mysteries. It answers a problem in most RPGs. Like, those of you familiar with D&D will notice this. In D&D, if you want to do a mystery, in most RPGs, if you want to do a mystery story, the party is running around looking for clues. You make a perception or search roll to find the clue. What happens when all the players blow the search roll and the clue they need to push the story forward isn't found? In most systems, DMs fudge things and say it was found anyway. Gumshoe came up with what it feels, and I tend to agree, is a better solution. You have two types of skills in Gumshoe: investigative skills and general skills. Investigative skills are search and fast talk and history and anthropology. There are things you use to gather information and to understand information. You do not roll investigative skills. You either have it or you don't. So, as long as at least one member of the party in Gumshoe has search, and you need search to find the main clue in the scene, you find the clue. There you go. Done. Now, there might be more information. Like, okay, you find a bullet casing. Or you find a better example. You find an antique sword. Well, I know about history. I can spend points out of my history to get more information. The more points I spend, the more information I'm given. General skills you do roll for, and those are shooting, punching, driving, things that you want the element of randomness to. That you don't care, the entire adventure doesn't grind to a halt if you don't shoot the bad guy the first time. It grinds to a halt if you can't find the clue. So Night's Black Agent is that kind of setting, except you're not detectives. You're spies. You're specifically, for those of you who know the TV show, you're burned spies. You were a member of the CIA, the NSA, MI6, MI5, KGB, or whatever the new thing other than the KGB is, Mossad, whatever. You're part of some espionage organization or some major, like the mafia or some other big criminal organization or similar clandestine group who's been the organization has formally washed their hands of you. You don't exist, that you don't work for them anymore. Why? In Night's Black Agents, there's generally one reason. You found out what in one supplemental side campaign is called the EDOM protocols. What is the EDOM protocols? Well, you see, in 1897, around 1897, British intelligence had an idea to recruit a very unique type of secret agent. They sent their agent, if you can't guess, Jonathan Harker, to Transylvania to recruit one Vladimir Tepes, Dracula, as an agent for British intelligence. And it makes sense when you think of it, because a vampire makes a pretty darn good secret agent. That whole incident went badly, and the brother of the agent in charge was given all the documents and asked to write an after action report, which became the novel Dracula. So, Night's Black Agents is a game where you are spies fighting vampires. And that is exactly as cool as it sounds. Particularly because it's not your ordinary horror game. In most horror games, Call of Cthulhu, for example, which is a good game, but I didn't get into it. You are ordinary people. You're a librarian who's found out monsters are real. You're a police detective who found out monsters are real. How about a world where you are a senior field agent for the FBI, a top CIA analyst, a Navy SEAL who figured out vampires are a thing and take up vampire hunting? That's Night's Black Agent. It is such a cool system. It's such a cool game. I'm a little disappointed we're not running it, but I absolutely adore Blades in the Dark as two of my favorite systems. So, when I put the choice to my players, it's like there is no wrong answer, and I'm quite happy with where we're going. So that's a list of at least some of the other RPGs other than Dungeons and Dragons that are out there. Check them out. If you like role playing games, if you like Dungeons and Dragons, I'm not saying don't play Dungeons and Dragons. I'm stopping streaming, and I'm even going to stop playing it at home for a while because of the decisions that Wizards of the Coast has made. Doesn't mean I'll never go back to it, but for the time being, I'm done. If you want to keep playing it, I'm not going to tell you not to. Do what you want, play what you want. But there are many other cool RPGs out there, and even if you stick with D&D, you might pick up one of them. See what you think. Maybe you run to once in a while. Next, go to a game convention. I highly recommend them. They're a lot of fun. Sit down on a table and go, I don't know this system. I want to learn. Teach me. Give it a go. I think you'll be glad you did. That's going to do it for tonight. Tomorrow night, or sometime tomorrow night after we run this session, I will be uploading the first episode of Blades in the Dark, the session 0. I hope you all check it out. Until then, this is it. For Dicing with Dragons, I'm your host and DM, Kevin Mears, saying If you like what I'm doing here, go check out my other channel, Paranormal Encyclopedia. I've got a very exciting guest tomorrow coming up on Wednesday. Um, at the very least, like, comment, and subscribe to these videos. And until next time, ladies and gentlemen, may your 20s always be natural. Good night.